Did you have any votes below 98%? No, all the votes.
Go ahead, because we said it's 10-2, so.
We'll play the video now from Ecuador.
Sorry, just a moment. Just a moment. Yeah. Because it's not 10-2 yet.
Yeah, we were just going to save 3 minutes of the meeting by doing it during the break.
Yeah, but I'd rather not do that.
Okay.
So, simply wait 1 minute.
Okay, no problem. No problem.
No, simply because of the respect for the Ecuadorian social.
But he's not there.
No, but more in general. So. Okay, let's start it. Do we need to give an intro or not? Simply.
No, we can just say this is the video that we tried to play earlier from Rodrigo Ibarra, president of the Ecuadorian Association.
Hello everyone, my name is Rodrigo Ibarra and I'm the president of the Ecuadorian Actuarial Association, IACT. In October 2021, the International Actuarial Association, IAA, admitted our association as a full member. This represents a unique achievement for a country like Ecuador with a population of 17 million people, a GDP of 100 billion US dollars, and only about 20 professional and registered actuaries. This accomplishment was a challenge, both personally and collectively, and was the result of a lot of hard work and commitment. It all began 28 years ago. I was invited to present a summary about the Ecuadorian actuarial profession at the International Congress of Actuaries in Montreal, Canada. Soon after, I decided to try and persuade the few Ecuadorian actuaries I knew, those who had studied in Europe or the US, to form an association. Later, thanks to the invitation of Chris Dakin, one of the most renowned actuaries in the world, I joined the Pensions, Benefits and Social Security section. And thanks to my involvement as a professor at the Universidad San Francisco de Quito, I participated as a lecturer in a few international conferences, especially related to the Social Security in Ecuador. This was a magnificent opportunity to fortify ties of collaboration with actuaries around the world. In 2017, with the support of an extraordinary team, we were able to form the Ecuadorian Actuarial Association, which began with 6 founding members. We immediately submitted our application to the IAA to be an associate member, which was accepted in November 2017 in Mexico City. In Ecuador, the actuarial profession is not widely known. Therefore, the IACT was established with the aim of promoting the actuarial profession in the country and raising awareness about its importance. One of our priorities is to provide continuous training for our members and offer various technical courses. But above all, we are driving the profession to adapt new technologies and methodologies. In short, Being an FMA of the IAA represents a milestone for the IACT. With this acceptance comes new challenges to obtain full recognition of the actuarial profession by the regulators in Ecuador, to establish the protocols that allow registered actuaries to practice the profession as framed by international principles, and to work professionally and ethically while avoiding conflicts of interest. We'll focus on developing training in areas related to Solvency II, IFRS 17, data analytics, and artificial intelligence to align with the current needs of Ecuadorian society. We also plan to work with other small countries in Latin America to advise them and help them to become FMA of the IAA. Finally, I would like to express my appreciation for all the support of the IAA Secretariat based in Ottawa. Looking forward to seeing you in the next meeting.
So that was the welcoming of Ecuador. It is fantastic to see that we are growing as a profession. And by the way, Gabor mentioned in a note to Mathieu, where's the medallion of Jan? Now, I wear it right now. But Gabor, where is your beard as Santa Claus?
Well, good question.
Probably the reason is that the next topic will be handled by you, and otherwise, with beard, we wouldn't have understood what you were saying.
Okay.
So, Gabor, go ahead and come up with your report of the nomination committee.
Thank you, Jan. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So this will be a report of and on behalf of the nominations committee by me as the chairperson for this year. So can we have the next slide, please? Yeah, so when we had the report in May at Council, then the process of how the nominations committee is working out its recommendations to Council and the Executive Committee was described, and I will not repeat that. I try to be as quick as possible because I understand time is running now. I showed some statistics about the candidates that were proposed by full member associations, the proposing associations themselves, and the nominations committee. So next slide, if we can continue. This is the current membership of the nominations committee. So you can see the ex officio members and the non ex officio members, and the red font indicates the outgoing members. So I would like to recognize Christelle, Mike Lombardi, and Nick as being a very efficient and good members of the nominations committee. Thank you, Christelle, Mike, and Nick. Next slide. So this will be the composition of the nominations committee if Council approves all nominations today. So the incoming new members will be Marika from Estonia, Jane from the IFOA, and Andrew from the Society of Actuaries. Next slide. Another important committee, very important committee, which I would like to talk about a little bit, is the Executive Committee. So this is the current membership, and Charles is outgoing a member. His mandate expires by the end of the year. And next slide. If Council approves the nominations, then Jill Hoffman, whom you've heard today quite a number of times, will become a member of the Executive Committee. Next slide, please. I would like to speak a little bit about diversity because it has been a focus for the nominations committee over plenty of time. And actually, there's a regulation, internal regulation talks about what kind of diversity aspects the nominations committee has to consider. There are a number of topics, for example, gender, geographical and linguistic diversity. However, I would like to emphasize, and this has been a statement or a declaration by all nominations committee I've served, that when the nominations committee makes a decision, the primary impact or primary ingredient to the decision is whether or not and to what extent the candidate is appropriate for the specific position. So, and also considering the circumstances and the environment in which that person who is nominated by the nomination committee will serve the IAA. So diversity issues are also important, but in the first place, the appropriateness of the candidate is contemplated by the nominations committee. Having said that, it is important also that overall the nominations committee serves the diversity goals of the IAA, and I will come back to this a bit later. But what kind of opportunities there are for the nominations committee to do that? If we can go to the next slide. So as you've heard, there's a diversity and inclusion task force, and it issued recently a statement, which I hope everybody who sits in council has read. And that emphasizes that we need to focus our efforts in areas of gender and generational diversity in the first place, or to start with. Gender has been a focus for the nominations committee for a long period of time, and I think, and some of these slides, which I will show, proves that some success has been made in this respect. And just to mention a few examples on the top leadership of the IAA. So over the decade up to 2018, all IAA officers had been males, and then in 2019 and 2020, 2 officers were male and 1 female. And in the past, this year and next year, if Michelin is elected, hopefully, then 2 officers will be female and 1 male. So this underlines that some of the efforts that has been made by the IAA Nominations Committee come true. So next slide, please. So tackling generational diversity has not been a focus for the nominations committee, perhaps up to now, but recently a number of discussions within the nominations committee have been devoted to such issues as generational diversity. It's rather difficult for the nominations committee to do much about that, but it will try next year as well. And you will see the solicitation letter for 2022-23 vacancies. 2022 because there are some vacancies due to resignations. So, and you will see that in that letter, the nominations committee emphasizes gender and generational diversity. So we ask full member associations to consider these aspects when make their proposals to the nominations committee. Now, in the following slides, there you will see some statistics, and I'm going through very quickly. So this is the tiers of leaders by proposing FMAs. So it means current leaders are the executive committee members, officers, committee chairs and vice chairs. So those are the leaders. And you see tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. Now tier 1, you may recall that those FMAs who have or which have at least 5,000 members with an actuarial credential, MWAC. So 5,000 or more. Tier 2 between 750 and 5,000, and tier 3 below or up to 750. So there is not much change now, and all these slides assume that Council will approve the nominations for the statutory and limited membership committees, because you have already approved the committee, non-statutory committee leadership a few hours ago. Let's go to next slide. So there are not much changes in the proposing FMAs. Next slide. This is the regions of leaders. Again, I would say there seems to be a shift toward USC, but otherwise not, and Europe shrinks a little bit, but it's not that a dramatic change, I guess. Next slide, please. Yep. The regions, again, for proposing FMAs, that's there seems to be a European domination in a sense, which might be considered. However, as I mentioned, and actually the nominations committee has very limited power to equalize, in a sense, this, because it depends on FMA's proposals that come in. Now let's go to the next slide. So the gender of the leaders, not much, but some slight change toward female leaders within the IA from 21 to 22. Next slide, please. And the language, then you need to know that NE stands for native English speaker, and NNE stands for non-native English speaker. So again, this is something which may need some attention for the future nominations committee in 2022 or other entities within the IAA. Next slide. So the next few slides will be on the executive committee. So the tiers of the executive committee, it seems a little bit more balanced than in 20. If Council approves, then it will be a bit more balanced than it was this year. Next slide, please. The regions doesn't seem to be changing pretty much, a bit perhaps, yeah, one shift from Europe to ALOA. Next slide, please. The gender, there seems to be a more equal distribution between males and females from this year to next year and next year. Next slide, sorry. The language, same as this year as next year. And okay, next slide. It's going to be on the nominations committee. So the final slides will be a few statistics on the composition of the nominations committee. Again, we start with the tiers. So tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. Not much change, I would say. Next slide, please. The regions seem to be not changing too much. Again, quite balanced. Next slide. The gender, now there seems to be a big leap, I would say, from males to females within this category. And lastly, the language, which will be the same as before. You see native English domination within the nominations committee. So that concludes practically my report. And the last slide, if I may, I would give the floor back to Jan to read this motion and where the nominations committee and the nominations committee seeks approval by Council for the appointments and reappointments to statutory and limited membership committees as presented by as presented by the nominations committee. So thank you, Jan. I stop talking unless someone has a question or comment to which I would need to reflect. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabor. Thank you very much for your very efficient way of presenting this. It really helps us. Before we get into the comments and questions, I simply would like to read the motion. And the motion is that on the recommendation of the nomination committee, council approve the appointments and reappointments as presented in the deployment charts which you have received. And I need a mover, so who wants to be the mover?
Mike Lombardi.
Yeah, and do we have a seconder?
Well, Ibrahim had his hand out. So Ibrahim, we're assuming you're seconding.
Okay. Then it's open for comments or questions. So who would like to raise a question? And I see Thomas raised his hand. So Thomas, go ahead.
Yes, I would like to tell you a feeling that I have. We have seen the photo at the beginning of your report, Jan, and I may say that I'm not very happy with the situation. The situation has worsened. If you see the leaders, we can say that we are 4 primary countries who are sending the leaders of IAA, meaning South Africa, Canada, US, and secondary providers as Germany, France, Ireland. But you have not so much or so many diversity among the countries who are providing the leaders of IAA. If you look at the forum leadership, if you look at the committee leaders, of course you have vice chairs, but if you look at the chairs of the forums, of the committees, you have a very, very few number of countries, which doesn't reflect the diversity of the world. We have set up a task force for diversity and inclusivity, but I think we should begin by ourselves, and IAA should try to encourage and help, and I would like to, I don't know, it's not monitor, but accompany people who are in vice chair position or in such situation coming from other countries to help them, really to help them to be able to become a leader. So it's something which is very important, and we will miss our targets if we are not acting much more in this situation. I know that nomination committees do what it can, because you can only promote people who are being sent by FMS, but we are really, really in a bad situation. So that's my comment.
We can't agree more, but probably Gabor would like to reflect on this as well. So Gabor.
I agree with Thomas. On behalf of the nominations committee, I can just repeat that there is very limited space for the nominations committee to improve that situation, because we work on what we receive. So it's I think that there are some elements of the nominations process which perhaps may be improved in terms of reaching a better balance of diversity for IA leaders. But I do believe that it is the duty of other entities of the IAA, namely the Strategic Planning Committee and the Executive Committee, who may decide on certain actions which would lead to a more balanced leadership of the IA, and considering, you know, all that Thomas mentioned. So I agree with Thomas, but as I say, the nominations committee itself does have limited power to balance the situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabor. Now, we notice it as well, and within the EC and within the offices, it's certainly a topic which we need to pay attention to. Tonya, would you like to say something about it?
Yeah, I just, I do agree with Gabor that we are dependent on who is presented to us as possibilities for appointments, and that is how the nominations committee is structured. It is something that we're evaluating, of course, at EC as part of the diversity inclusion efforts that Lisa explained. Part of that effort is going to be discussing and trying to encourage FMAs to take action themselves. If you, as an association, are looking for more diversity and inclusion, then that will be reflected ultimately in the IAA itself. So I think that these suggestions are important, that we can encourage ourselves and each other to do more as individual associations, and that will ultimately have I think the biggest impact or the most influence on where we ultimately are as an association. So thank you, Gabor, and I agree with you. Thank you.
And by the way, in our conversations with the individual member associations, which we have as officers, it's a kind of standard topic which we simply put on the agenda. So we are working on that, but you don't see the result yet. So there's still a lot of work to do. Ibrahim.
Yes, I'd like to echo my agreement with Thomas and go a little bit further, saying that the current representation, for example, of the nomination committee of having 50-50 does not even represent the total actuarial body. So having diversity sometimes it biases the representation. I disagree with the Gabor saying that they have limited the databases to work with. As a matter of fact, I know for a fact that my association in Lebanon have put my name forward several times, unless you tell me I'm disqualified to chair certain committees. Don't tell me that we don't have feedback from small associations to that effect. So it will be very interesting whereby the nomination committee goes back and give feedback to the FMAs why did their nominations are not being answered for many years.
Thank you, Ibrahim. Because of the time, I would like to give the floor to Philip for your contribution. Philip, you're still on mute.
Yes, thank you. Apologies. Good morning, everyone, and thanks to Gabor for his presentation. I suppose the only thing as an actuary that I would have found more interesting was that if there'd been a slightly longer trend than 2 years, because I think there has been an improvement over the years in the diversity that the nominations committee have been able to offer in the leadership appointments. As a former member of the committee, I fully appreciate all Gabor's comments about having to work with the names that are submitted. And I think the key, as Tanya has said, is to encourage smaller associations who haven't been well represented to put forward names in the expectation that there is a reasonable prospect that they will be appointed to positions. And perhaps that can be done in a more exciting way than sending a solicitation letter. Obviously, one-to-one discussions are good. Perhaps an inspiring video from some people who've participated as leaders who can encourage others to put their names forward might help. But perhaps just as an aspiration, the nominations committee could try to ensure that where a committee has a chair and 2 vice chairs, that one is from each of tiers 1, 2, and 3, and that would be obviously a good target to aim for in terms of diversity, in terms of nominating associations. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. Would you like to reflect on that, Gabor?
Yes, especially on the comment from Ibrahim. I think that as I emphasized on one of the slides presented, the nominations committee currently considers the appropriateness of a candidate and makes the assessment based on the how fit the proposed candidate is to the position, and it does not place diversity considerations on top of the appropriateness. Now, it might be a case if the IA decides that diversity is more important than that, but I think that needs a high-level decision by the IA. For example, setting up quotas. Personally, I would disagree with that, but that would be a decision, a value choice by the IA if diversity is placed as a #1 criterion, and fitness for the position comes second only. Currently, the nominations committee works on the assumption that fitness and the appropriateness of the candidate is the most important issue. Thank you, Jan.
Thank you, Gabor. So now I suggest that we will come to the poll. So who is in favor of this motion? So who wants to approve this one? So a simple majority is necessary. So we got this that majority. So the motion has been approved. So thank you very much, Gabor, as chair of the nomination committee last year, and with all the great work you've done so far. So a big applause for Gabor. So. Oh, sorry, I missed one hand. Louise, is it in relation to the nomination committee? That you
no, sorry, I was just volunteering to propose.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Louise. The next slide. No problem. No problem. Yeah, then we come to the report from the chair of the Audit and Finance Committee. So I would like to give the floor to Jane, so the chairperson of the A&F committee. Jane, go ahead.
Thank you, Jan, and hello to all of you listening today. Next slide, please, Christian. So my report today will cover the work plan of the committee since I last reported to you in May. We'll also take a look at the third quarter financial statements and look at the expected outturn to the end of the year. I'm required to report on the investment portfolio overview, so we'll do that for the position as at the end of September. We'll spend a little bit more time looking at the proposed reserve policy, and there is a motion to propose that policy to council for approval, and finally the motion to approve the auditors for this year's accounts. So if we look at the work plan for 2021 and for the second half, and despite the ongoing pandemic, it's been more of a business usual year for the committee. So on your behalf, we carry out regular monitoring of the financial reporting, and you will see in a moment from the financial statements that expenses are much reduced. And so when we're looking at the financial reporting, it hasn't been particularly onerous requirement this year because all has been financially sound. We've also reviewed and updated the risk register, and there's probably a little bit more work to do on that. And we take a very disciplined approach to monitoring compliance with all the financial policies of the IAA and having a regard to our own terms of reference. So let's move to the financial statements for the IAA, and this excludes the sections. So you will see here the first sort of columns show the actual position to the for the period to the end of September against the budget. So you'll see as at the end of September, we had a net surplus position of just over 1.6 million Canadian dollars. And that compares, with the position at the end of September last year, which was just over $1 million there. The forecast for the end of year for the net surplus position is for a position of $1.6 million. So a very, healthy position compared with what we had a few years ago. And moving down to the bottom half of the slide, sorry, can we just go back to the, just shows the revenue and expenses position. You'll see that the position as at the end of September compared with budget, you see the revenue line is very, very close to budget, which was really pretty much as expected, but the expenses are somewhat reduced from what have been budgeted. The final column shows the forecast, so we're still forecasting a healthy surplus for the year, but that forecast was before the change to the in-person meeting arrangements, so before we moved from Amsterdam to Madrid and made more of the meetings virtual. So moving on then, just to comment on the specifics of the financial statements. Obviously the surplus is due to the cancellation of meetings and the reduction in associated expenses. Travel is very significantly less than expenses, but so otherwise the revenue and expenses are in line with the budget. So moving on then, the next slide, I'm hoping Christian shows, yes it does, the next slide shows the asset allocations for the surplus funds as at 30th September. So the surplus funds are those assets which we do not expect to access during the short term. Those of you who are familiar with the investment policy of the IAA, there's quite a lot more money in the operating funds which are held in short-dated assets. Now on this slide we show the allocation of the surplus funds for the IAA, including the sections. That's the first set of first columns of numbers, and on the right-hand side of the slide for the IAA, excluding the sections. Now, due to the timing, the allocation of the bond portfolio is just outside its target benchmark, as you will see on that slide, but this is kept under review by Caroline, who's the Director of Finance. Now, I think next time I report to you, changes will need to be made to the asset allocation to reflect the change in the investment policy, which was agreed by Council earlier in the year. That's not reflected in this position at the end of September. So moving now on to the operating reserve policy. Work on this reserve policy has been done in the past, but was put on hold pending the restructuring of the IAA. The Audit and Finance Committee has long held the view that it is sound financial management to maintain an operating reserve to mitigate the financial risk to the IAA arising from unforeseen events. And in fact, we appointed a new auditor in 2020 for our 2019 accounts. And during the audit of the 2020 accounts earlier this year, she commented on our lack of a reserves policy. The Secretariat has done some benchmarking, and we believe that retaining a reserve of between 75% and 100% of our annual operating expenses would be in line with best practice for an organisation such as ours. The IA, of course, is unusual in that we also retain funds for the sections, and we have considered how best to allow for this in our assessment of the expenses reserve. The assets accumulated by the sections are not included in our calculation of the unrestricted net assets available to the IAA, but in our calculation of the annual net expenses, which would need to be met by the IAA, we have allowed for a recovery of expenses from the sections during that year. So our policy, which we're putting to Council today, is to set a target of operating reserves of net assets of between 75% and 100% of anticipated expenses over the coming year. Just on a small point of detail, because it got raised in questions at SBC when they looked at this, expenses met by the restricted assets or revenue specifically raised for one-off expenses would not normally be included in our assessment of anticipated net expenses for the coming year. Finally, Audit and Finance discussed how we might monitor this reserve going forward, and we will do this as part of our regular review of the budget. And at this stage, we felt it was appropriate to retain flexibility so that we can see what works best in practice. So we've therefore not been prescriptive in the policy, which is shown on this slide here. So I might, and my successor as chair in due course, will report to council on the operating reserve policy at the 6 monthly check-in points with council. So I think that completes my report, Jan. I'm happy to hand back to you to cover the two motions, one for the reserve policy and one for the auditor for 2021 accounts.
Thank you, Jane. So the motion which we have here is that on the recommendation of the Audit and Finance Committee, Council approve the reserve policy as presented. I see two hands raised, so I guess these are for the mover and the seconder. Ralph, is that correct? Yes. And what was the second one?
Well, we already had Louise earlier on to move the motion. Remember?
Yeah, but that was for this one? Yeah. Okay, then Louise is the mover and Ralph is the seconder. Great. Any questions or any comments on this motion? I don't see any, so that's very efficient. So let's start the poll. We need a simple majority, and we already have that. So thank you very much. The motion has been approved. Next slide, please. The second motion is about the auditor for 2021. And the motion is that on the recommendation of the Audit and Finance Committee, Council appoints the firm of Parker Prince Lebano as the IAA auditors for 2021 for the audit of the financial statements on December 31, 2021. Do we have a mover? Lutz. Do we have a seconder? Justin Bonestro. Great, thanks. Open for any questions or comments. I don't see any. So, Anne, please start the poll. So who is in favor of this motion? We need a simple majority, and we already have. So we can stop the poll. So thank you very much. This motion has been approved as well. Thanks a lot. Next slide, please. That's back to you, Jane, I guess. Or is it Mathieu? Mathieu.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. It is my yearly pleasure and privilege to put on my treasurer hat and present the next year's budget for approval to council. This budget has already been approved by the EC and it has been discussed in length at the Audit and Finance Committee. And we are in a situation that I'm actually rather happy for various reasons. And I will go very briefly because, of course, you have seen this document for quite some time now. Quick mention is the budget is now under a new format, presenting our expenses broken down by our main cost centers. This was discussed at the SPC earlier, well, late last year, early this year. We have implemented this format to help illustrate trends to readers. You will also notice that we have used many years to compare because, of course, it is difficult to compare with the years of pandemic. So we have included up to 2019 to give the readers easier comparison. In terms of the income, you will notice that the income is rather flat. There is no significant variance in MWAC, which is the member with an actuarial credential. That is the formula we've been using since 2019. Some FMAs are seeing slight increases, some slight decreases, as was presented earlier in the meeting by Mike McDougall, the chair of the membership committee. You will also notice, of course, that the membership fee rate remains the same at $18.35 Canadian, and this is the 7th year in a row now of that similar amount. You will as well see, just a quick note, the section administrative cost recovery is now presented in the expenses. This is simply to clarify that this is a pure cost recovery to ensure that the FMAs do not pay for the cost of supporting sections. Quick mention, the interest and investment revenue will increase slightly as we finally have reserves that are worthy of the name reserves for the first time in 20 years. Thank you to the pandemic and the impossibility for us to have travel for those. And I will take 30 seconds to talk to council about, because every single year I hear or somebody asks the question, how come we don't have more sponsors and patrons as the magic silver bullet of the IA revenues? And every single year I mention that the IAA council and committees meetings are simply not appealing for most patrons and sponsors. They much prefer to invest in visibility at ICA, colloquia, or FMA events. And yes, we do talk to many of those large companies on a yearly basis to see if the situation is changing. And the information that we are getting is vastly that their expenses for sponsorship is not increasing. On the contrary, it is reducing. And some of the discussions that we have were even further saying, well, sure, we can give you a little bit more money, but it's money that we're going to take away from colloquia or ICA or FMA events. And that is a venue or an avenue where there's nobody winning. So it is just taking one pocket, money from one pocket to the next, and everybody loses at that game. So we are not, we are continuing our discussions, but it is not a silver bullet for the revenue. Expenses, you will see that for 2020, the plan is to have 1 in-person council and committee meetings in Brussels, and I'm pointing to Philippe Demol in front of me, for May 2022. We are hopeful that the situation of the pandemic will allow us to have one large meeting with very good attendance. We are also planning to have 1 additional in-person SPC meeting, as we discussed at the SPC yesterday. Of course, the date and the details are to be determined at this point, pending, of course, the situation in the pandemic. Total staff support expenses remain lower than at the 2019 levels because we have been continuing to pay really close attention to our cost reduction efforts. So that is something that we are doing all the time. You will notice as well, of course, in terms of the main expenses, and this was discussed earlier by you, Mr. President, that we are really going to focus on enhancing our IT for the next many years, simply because we have reached the maximum of what we can with the current system. So we are going out to get an external partner to extend our capacities for things like virtual communities, better engagement, and so on. So stay tuned for more information on that. Hopefully, by the time we are in Brussels, we will be able to present some exciting news. Marketing support, of course, for ICA. As you know, next year is ICA 2023. Usually, ICA years are expensive for the IA simply because there's a lot of activities that we are supporting. So just a quick note in advance to know that in the future, we are not expecting to have large surplus for next year because of the ICA event in 2023 in Sydney, with the cost of travel and the cost of the local venues and so on. But we are certainly extremely enthusiastic about going to Sydney. Two very quick notes as well, and Christian, that's good note to consider. We are just illustrating, of course, the IAA reserves, what it looks like. And of course, this year you see it's a little higher because we do not have a lot of expenses related to events, as Jane presented. But next year we are planning for one large in-person event. So you see visually where we would land with that. And of course, now that the policy has just been approved, the Audit and Finance Committee is going to work on a yearly basis to assess the current level. Next slide, please. You will see, of course, the allocation of revenues as well. This is something that we're going to try to do going forward, just to show a little bit where we want, and you can visually see that part of our focus is really in terms of communication and IT to develop in the future. And that's it. So unless you have any questions on this document, Mr. President, I hand over to you for the motion.
Thank you, Mathieu. So I don't have any questions, but let's first simply express what the motion is, and let's gather a mover and a seconder. So the motion is that on the recommendation of the Executive Committee, Council approve the proposed budget and membership fees for 2022 as presented. Do we have a mover?
I will.
Thank you, Jacques. Do we have a seconder? No one wants to be a seconder. Wilhelm. Thank you, Wilhelm. So now it's open for any comments or questions. Do we have any?
I think it was just late hands to move a second.
Okay, great. Then it's very efficient. Thanks. And let's start the poll. And by the way, Anne is not here. That is really a pity. So who approves this motion? And we need a simple majority, and we just got it. So we can end the poll. So thank you very much. The motion has been approved. Next slide, please. Now we come to the business agenda. And then I would like to hand it over to Elf Godes as EC liaison to the Actuarial Standards Committee. Elf.
Thank you, Jan. Good morning, good day, good evening from me as well to all of you who are listening today. I'm standing in for Andrew Chamberlain, the chair of the ASC today, who sends his regrets and apologizes that the video he prepared was not deemed to be acceptable because there were some scenes in there that may offend a member of our leadership. Chris, please. So you'll have to make do with me today. Chris, next slide, please. What has the ASC been up to during the last 6 months? Chris, the first and main focus was on ISAP 7. Lots of work was done by the task force, by the ASC and the task force. Good progress made, and the exposure draft is close to completion. Chris? Secondly, there's close collaboration with the EC on the issue of specimen actuarial standards. There appears to be a real interest in producing these from the part of the FMAs. Chris? Approaches for establishing a relationship with the ISSB. Gabor had asked the question earlier today. The founding of this body was announced at COP26, and we are working together with the ASC and the super roundtable to make that happen. And the last point, Chris, the reviews of ISAPs 5 and 6 in 2022 will come back on the agenda in or as per the due process for ISAPs. That was it. Thank you. Returning back to you, Jan.
Thank you, Al. Are there any questions or comments to the report of Al? I don't.
What Gabor asked in the chat, to have a little bit more information about the ISAP 7 work. Al, can you comment a little bit on that?
Not a lot, Gabor. This is not my area.
What does ISAP 7 stand for? So what is it? I mean, I know, but perhaps not everybody knows what ISAP 7 stands for.
Well, you say so. I always get mixed up. This is the best estimates or something. Gabor mentioned we're working together with the IAIS.
Indeed.
On
International capital standards, and it's current estimates and related topics. Yes, indeed.
Current estimates.
Okay.
Right.
Matthew posted in the chat. Thank you.
I see that Ralph raised his hand. So, Ralph.
As a member of the ISAP 7 task force and as someone who's been involved in the ICS for too long, the original concept was current estimates. The reality is that the actual standard being developed by the IAIS largely relies on currently published GAAP financial statements. So this is now morphed into a standard with regard to completing the ICS submission. So it's in most cases, it's not current estimates, but it is allocation and adjustment of current estimates. So just be aware that a title change may be coming in the future.
Thanks, Ralph.
Okay, thanks. If there are no further questions, then let's move on to the next slides and the next topic, and that is about the change of the officers. I don't know why my music starts, but I would like to ask the guests